And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. We have quite the show for you tonight. I have another guest on this week. His name's Dan Burdorf. He's running on the Tax Wall Street Party platform out in Nebraska for the U.S. Senate seat. We're going to talk to him tonight about his platform and a number of other issues as well. But before we do that, I want to remind you that you can catch this show every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at UCY.TV. Again, Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can get the show's personal webpage there at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. And there you'll find the RSS feed of my more recent articles, the archive versions of this show, and, of course, the Internet chat room if you're interested in that. Keep up with my work at activistpost.com and the antimedia.org. Those are the two websites that I write for. But if you are interested in my work specifically, then I would encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com and check out that website, which is the site where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, the interviews that I've done, and the archive versions of this show and so forth. All of the relevant information is there. Also, the books, one of the 6 books we just came off of an election in Syria. There is a book on Syria that I've written, my latest book, The Road to Damascus, the Anglo-American Assault on Syria. It's available there, so you click on the books tab on brandonturbeville.com. Also, some contact information is available on that site as well. But to get to our guest tonight, I mentioned him earlier, and his name is Dan Burdorf. He is running for the U.S. Senate out of Nebraska on the Tax Wall Street Party ticket. And his last name is spelled Buhdorf. Again, Buhdorf. And his website is danfornebraska.com. And well, before I talk anymore, I just wanted to welcome Dan to the show. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks very much, Brandon. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, I'm glad you come on. And before we get into the platform, I'd like to let you kind of introduce yourself to the audience and tell us who you are and why you're running for U.S. Senate.
Sure. Well, thanks very much. Like you said, my name is Dan Burdorf, and I'm a 4th or 5th generation Nebraskan, depending on which side of the family you look at. I was born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska. I was born at William Jennings Bryan Hospital. He's a famous Nebraskan. I'm sure many of your listeners will know who he is. And right now I happen to live just a few blocks away from the hospital where I was born. I went to the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and I've worked as a teacher and school principal for many years. I came back to Lincoln, my hometown, to look after my parents when they got sick. And now my father has since passed away, and I'm caring for my mother, who has a number of health issues that require my support. And like you said, my website is danfornebraska.com. Well, I grew up in a household where my father faced chronic illness my whole life, and I understand the economic struggles that can face a family. And I understand how families can have tremendous pressure on them when paying their basic monthly bills. And I also understand how hardworking people can push themselves to take care of their families. And sometimes it is a real push because there's a economic basis for family values. That's something I believe in. Families can be under tremendous economic pressures that disrupt solid, supportive, healthy lives. And I want to be senator for Nebraska so I can fight for Nebraskans and Americans to have quality housing, good jobs, lots of jobs, quality education, good infrastructure, 21st century infrastructure, and 21st century transportation. And I want to get out this message so that people can enjoy these benefits that we have in America.
Well, yeah, let's get into that. And it's interesting that you mentioned that you believe there's an economic basis for family values, and I agree. That's sort of a novel concept now in American politics, although it shouldn't be. But
sure.
To take a look at your platform, which I really want people to take a look at here. Again, the website is danfornebraska.com, and the program is listed on the website. But let's talk about sort of the basics and the basis of the platform, starting with the Wall Street sales tax. And
Okay,
yeah,
sure.
tell us a
Well,
little bit about that and what it is and what it's going to do and how you want to approach it.
sure. Okay. Well, the Wall Street sales tax is an idea um, that that comes. It's an innovation that I think I'm bringing. See, I want to tax Wall Street, the buying and selling on Wall Street, because right now Wall Street pays no tax, and I want to develop these family values, the economic basis of family values, including that Wall Street sales tax. But I also wanted to tell you that after we develop these family values for people, then I want to get out of the way. I want to get out of the way and let Americans develop their families as they see fit. Okay, so I believe in a strong constitutional government and a strong constitutional background to things. But like you said, the Wall Street sales tax is an innovation that I'm pushing, and it's estimated that Wall Street has $5 quadrillion in trades annually, and that's 5,000 million dollars, or a 5 with 15 zeros behind it. That's a lot of money and a lot of trade, and that's not taxed, and it's not even tracked accurately. And so a Wall Street sales tax is an innovation that serves two purposes. One, it would stop derivative trading that caused the 2007-2008 economic crisis, because with a tax, the flash trades and the micro trades wouldn't be viable anymore. And two, the tax would provide enough revenue to save the social safety net from any kind of killer cuts. And the proceeds from like a Wall Street sales tax would be split in half to the federal government and half to the states to save the social safety net. So that's grandma's Medicare, VA benefits on the federal level, and it would stop any cuts to universities, research hospitals, or libraries on the state and local levels. So that would fully fund social obligations and public payrolls and pensions. So we would protect households from this tax so it wouldn't affect people investing for their retirement or people trading to supplement their incomes. And we'd have $1 million yearly exemption with less than $1 million in financial transactions. So about 99% of Americans wouldn't be affected by this tax at all. So those would be people that they wouldn't affect their this tax wouldn't affect their 401ks or their IRAs, because they would never reach $1 million in trades every year. And so it wouldn't be a wealth tax. It wouldn't be a wealth tax. It's a sales tax directed at the professional financial speculation market. And this Wall Street sales tax would redirect capital investment towards productive enterprises, right? So the industries would be able to create and grow, and we'd be creating and growing industries, agriculture, and jobs. And you can read more about it at my website, danfornebraska.com.
Yeah, that again, you mentioned Wall Street pays no taxes. This is not just a philosophical statement. They literally don't pay taxes. And in fact, a lot of them, the bigger ones especially, they not only do not pay taxes, but they get money back.
That's right. That's right. It's mad. Yeah. It's quite crazy.
Yeah.
And there's a fee that they pay to the SEC, but that's just to police themselves, as it were.
Yeah, it's a very small percentage. It's something like 0.0005% or something, and even that brings in billions of dollars. There's also the question of sales tax when we have the average American is paying up to 12% in some places on staple goods, even sales taxes on food in some states. But 1% I don't think is too much to ask of Wall Street.
No, not at all. I pay 7.5% sales tax when I buy a pair of shoes, and a 1% sales tax wouldn't be too bad. But the good thing about it actually is that it would limit those derivative tradings, because if with a 1% tax, for example, you could only do a limited number of the same trade before you start to lose money. So again, your investments are redirected right into productive investments. So it really is a win-win for Americans.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of the elements where you would take that money, half to the states, half to the feds, and then you're talking about essentially eliminating the budget deficit, but also shoring up the social safety net. You've also got, as part of your platform, the idea of building infrastructure, and there's a way you have to do that. There's something you have to do first with the Federal Reserve. Why don't you tell us about that?
Well, what I have planned is to mobilize the Federal Reserve to build and rebuild the infrastructure, right? So if we look at it today, the American Society of Civil Engineers, that's the ASCE, they've given America a grade on its infrastructure, and this grade is not so impressive if you're an American. Now, the ASCE is the oldest national engineering society in the U.S. It was founded in 1852. It's based in Virginia, and it has members worldwide, so it's a very prestigious organization, right? So it gave the U.S. a grade of a D+ on its infrastructure, and that's up from a D- previously. And the ASCE said the U.S. needs to invest about $3.6 trillion in infrastructure by 2020. And this money just can't be added to the yearly budget. So we need to mobilize the Federal Reserve to purchase about $5 trillion in 100-year bonds at 0% from states, municipalities, local authorities, and target this exclusively to rebuilding the public infrastructure and funding research and development in the national laboratories and expanding public research and development. And that's why I say $5 trillion instead of 3.6, because we're going to be doing this not just for the infrastructure, but also for research and development. And the collateral for these bonds would be the infrastructure itself, you see, and the credit would be repaid by increased tax revenue coming right off of the projects by way of economic growth that they generated. So you get the idea. So we need a 21st century energy technology, 21st century transportation, 21st century communication infrastructure. We need public research to find the causes and cures of diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's. And we need to find out how to prevent and cure these diseases as well as develop our country. So that's one thing I'm excited about, is developing the country. And I think one thing that I want to push in this election is to talk about a high-speed rail from New York to Los Angeles, right through Nebraska, right through Lincoln and Omaha. So you can imagine, people trying to go to a cultural event in another city like Denver or Chicago, or somebody needs a business trip to Kansas City. You can imagine how valuable a resource high-speed rail would be in America.
Yeah, and of course, other countries are already developing this high-speed rail, and there's no legitimate reason why the United States should be left behind in this, or any other technological advancement either. You're talking about not only rebuilding the infrastructure, not only improving the infrastructure, but also science drivers, right? We're talking about progress, so we could do things. If you're concerned about the environment, you're talking about developing technologies that enable industry, but at the same time encourage environmental responsibility, not through Agenda 21 type stuff,
right,
or eco-fascism, but
sure,
but simple technological advancement.
Well, this would create a massive opportunity for employment as well, in good-paying jobs and good careers, and we could use this to rebuild the industries and jobs that have been lost to free trade and that giant sucking sound that of industries going overseas that we heard about for so many years. And you could see a boost also on the economic side, a boost to materials and manufactured goods. And the Federal Reserve would offer, under this idea, they could offer cheap credit for productive activities through solvent banks, right? Because we have a lot of insolvent banks right now, a lot of zombie banks, but we could have cheap credit put through from the Federal Reserve through solvent banks at the local level. So this would shift the federal bailouts to away from financial services to productive areas instead. And on Main Street, people involved with productive activities would have access to this cheaper federal credit. So, for example, manufacturing that supports the infrastructure, like farmers, auto mechanics, plumbers, engineers, dry cleaners, artists, they would all be tied to the developing infrastructure, and we would in effect be stopping the bailout of banks and bailing out America. And as senator, I also want to mobilize this power of the Fed in other ways as well.
Well, there's I have to ask, when you mentioned free trade, the idea, how do you prevent the giant sucking sound? Now, we talked about rebuilding the infrastructure. Obviously, that's something that's going to be here, but the giant sucking sound of an industry of not just manufacturing, but a number of other industries as well.
Sure.
Do you have an idea of what might be needed to end that free trade whirlpool of jobs leaving the country?
Well, sure. I do have. One of the benefits of running as a third party is that historic chance that a third party has to bring innovation to the political process in America. And I have a number of innovations. I think the Wall Street sales tax is one, and I think an innovation of tariffs is another one. Now, it's odd to say that tariffs is an innovation, but if you look at an era of free trade, you can understand what I mean by tariffs being innovation. But I would like to tell you before I go into the tariffs is that as senator, I'd also like to use the Federal Reserve to bail out students as well as bailing out America, you see. And that's why I want to let everyone know that I support the Bank on Students Act. And that's a bill that would force the Federal Reserve to refinance federal student loans that at about 0.75%, because it's not enough to audit the Fed. Brandon, we need to make the Fed act like a national bank, and we need to protect our currency and provide opportunities for development for our country. And so we can't afford to just end the Fed, because where would you get credit needed to keep the country running if you ended the Fed? We need to mobilize the Fed for development and developing the industries and the workforce of the 21st century. So go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, continue. I'll chime in a second.
What I was going to say is that we can grow the economy, build infrastructure, grow industry and family farms, and this will expand the tax base, right? And so students would benefit from this because we could grow economic surplus that could make education affordable, right? Make the education affordable. And there's no reason why we can't start this right now. And that's why I'd love your listeners to go to my webpage, danfornebraska.com, and see what I'm talking about there.
Now, when you're talking about taking back the Fed, what people may not understand is that you're talking about nationalizing the Fed. So, this would essentially eliminate the privatized nature of it as it stands now. But even if you're unable to actually pass an all-encompassing law that says the Federal Reserve is now nationalized, the ability to force the Fed to offer credit and so forth, that's sort of a de facto nationalization, right? This is maybe not the all-encompassing law, but if you're talking about having them buy up student debt and so forth, then this is a de facto nationalization.
Sure, and what I want to do is mobilize the Federal Reserve to act like a national bank and stop acting like that quasi-private, quasi-public bank that is just bailing out their owner banks. So I think that's a great way to bring about a reindustrialization of America and meet those goals of rebuilding the infrastructure. Because if you don't invest publicly, you're going to keep right on that U-turn of of deindustrialization. So, but but getting back to this, another what could you say? Another bullet in the barrel or the bullet in the gun is that the protective tariffs, like we said, sounds like a funny thing to claim as an innovation, but you know, it is an innovation, and it was even an innovation with the GOP 100 years ago when they brought in this idea of protective tariff. And at that time, the Republicans were a third party or a new party, and they were bringing in innovations. But it's been a long time, and the list of eager Republicans and Democrats that support a protective tariff is very small. But if you look at China, China has a 25% tariff on Ford, GM, and Chrysler automobiles, right? So it's just common sense to, as you can see with the example of China, it's common sense to have a protective tariff. And who can blame them? Who can blame them for a protective tariff? We should blame our representatives for not protecting our industries. And as senator, I'll begin efforts to suspend all free trade agreements in an orderly way. I mean, we don't have to rush into it. We can do it in a very orderly way. So it'll be a very calm transition. But we can renegotiate with our trading partners in ways that will benefit both them and us. And we can start with protective tariffs on critical industries, let's say at around 15%. And some industries may require less. Some industries might not even require any tariffs, depending on our economic strategy. So if we want to develop a critical industry, we would want to put a protective tariff on it, right? A higher tariff, for example. And if we needed a product we couldn't supply ourselves, we could put no tariff at all on that product. So you look at about 15% as a starting point to consider with these protective tariffs, and you can put that on the better part of our products coming in.
Right, and again, as you mentioned, the idea of a tariff is not something that's new in American history. Only recently has the idea of using trade tariffs and so forth to protect your industry been considered, an innovation or
right.
used as a dirty word under the term protectionism, as if it's a bad thing. Of course, there's nothing wrong with protectionism. This is what you're supposed to do.
It's what a responsible government should do. You're right. Mm-hmm.
Well, all right.
I'm old enough. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, continue.
Well, I was just going to say I'm old enough to remember when free trade was a new idea, and it's strange to me that to come around to in the circle to say that protective tariffs are a new idea, because we've laid waste to most of our industries, and a tariff is a good tool to go back to grow an industry and bring revenue so that we can save the social safety net, lower income taxes, lower property taxes, help finance infrastructure and research and education for our workforce. And cheap credit from the Fed would also help reindustrialize, and it'll give us a competitive advantage for our exporters and manufacturers.
Well, now we've talked about manufacturing and industry and so forth, but I want to talk a little bit about agriculture. We got about 4 minutes left in this segment, but if we need to continue on the other side, that's fine, because it's an important topic. But you've got a segment here on your website, danfornebraska.com, where you talk about parity agriculture and what you're going to do for the small farmer. And I know this is specific concern for Nebraska, which is a big agricultural state, but it's also a big concern for the rest of the country, because we depend on states like Nebraska, but also, here I'm located in South Carolina. We also have a high percentage of agriculture here. So we're concerned about this as well. But can you explain the idea of using parity price and also what your plan is for the family farmer, the small farmer?
Sure. Now that's another innovation, right? That's another innovation that I'm bringing back, if you will. That's a fair price, a fair price and a fair price floor on commodities based on the actual value of our food. Okay, so you're looking at this fair price idea, and I would want the Secretary of Agriculture to issue non-recourse loan guarantees or promises to purchase on delivery, right, based on the actual value, the real value of the food. Okay, so this would bring parity back to the marketplace and give farmers and ranchers a floor for their prices, because the buyer would have they'd have a reason to offer prices better than the minimum guaranteed by the government, so that he could do business, right? So you would offer at least as much as the guarantee or better, so that people would buy from him. So right now, beef prices are at an all-time high, but beef producers are going out of business. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, yes, I know what you're talking about.
Right, okay. So because they can't get decent prices, right? So the cartels are pocketing all the profits, and so offering a floor to producers would provide a change in that. So there would be an effective alternative to what my opponents offer up. So my opponents are saying, well, maybe we need more places for our producers to sell. Well, I'm saying, well, why don't we produce a floor so that they can get offered reasonable prices by these grain cartels and these other commodity cartels. And we also need a full funding of food programs. That's another thing that I want to do for the farmers. Food programs like food stamps, women, infants, and children, food for peace. We need to redevelop American soft power with programs like Food for Peace, and we need to strengthen our emergency aid through food as well. So I have friends in Taiwan, the Republic of China. That's free China, right? And they tell me that they have always loved America, and why? It's because all their food was marked USA when they were little kids, and the only thing my friend's family grew up making themselves or producing themselves were mushrooms. So everything else came from the U.S. when they were kids, right? This is in a time when Taiwan was really struggling. And so I know personally that the soft power has results, and the U.S. can win influence in the world through good stewardship. Okay? And so we can pay for these programs with the Wall Street sales tax, and we can mobilize the Federal Reserve, like I discussed on my website, danfornebraska.com.
All right, Dan, I want you to hold that thought, because we're going to continue talking about the platform on the other side.
Thanks very much.
We've got to stop right now for a break. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest is Dan Burdorf. He's a candidate for the U.S. Senate seat out of Nebraska, and his website is danfornebraska.com, so please check that out. We're going to be right back on the other side. Stay with us.
And Attorney General Eric Holder announced this week the creation of a new Justice Department task force entitled the Domestic Terrorism Executive Committee. Its mandate is to combat the threat of homegrown terrorists within the United States, citing the Boston Marathon bombings last year and the 2 shooting incidents at Fort Hood, Texas, as examples of the escalating danger of domestic terrorism. Holder has stated, as the nature of the threat we face evolves to include the possibility of individual radicalization via the internet, it is critical that we return our focus to potential extremists here at home. Holder also noted that the task force will focus on individuals within our borders motivated by anti-government sentiments and racial prejudice as well. Lee Rowland, a staff attorney at the ACLU, responded to Holder's statements by saying the Attorney General Holder's announcement that the new task force will focus on evidence of anti-government animus and racial intolerance raises concerns that it could be a sweeping mandate to monitor and collect controversial speech. The committee is a recreation of a task force created in 1995 by former Attorney General Janet Reno in the wake of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. The original committee sparked concerns over its targeting of right-wing extremists. Well, it was disbanded after the attacks on 9/11 shifted the Justice Department's focus to overseas terrorist groups.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmind5.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. I'd like to remind you to catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night and Friday night here at UCY.TV. And also remind you that tonight my guest is Dan Burdorf. He's a candidate for the U.S. Senate seat out of Nebraska. He's running on the Tax Wall Street Party ticket, and his website is danfornebraska.com. And we were talking about a number of platform points that he has, such as the Wall Street sales tax, taking back the Fed, and parity agriculture and protective tariffs and so forth. But that was in the first segment. We're going to continue to talk about some of his platform points here in this segment. And one of the points that interests me as well, Dan, is the what you call a global peace race. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, the idea behind the global peace race is that we have an opportunity here with our competitors and our friends as well around the country, or not around the country, but around the world, to do something better than what we've done before. So I'm the growth candidate in Nebraska, and I'm the social justice candidate in Nebraska, and I'm also the peace candidate in Nebraska. And I support the continued withdrawal of forces from Iraq and Afghanistan and other combat theaters. And I'll always reject coups, anarchy, chaos, terrorist powers in anywhere like Syria or Ukraine or elsewhere. And I also support this global peace race. And this is also an innovation that I think I'm bringing to this race. And it's a serious, productive effort to grow economies and promote living standards in America and around the world. And we want high-tech, high-value development of our energy and infrastructure, not only in America, but also around the world. So, for example, in China, if China builds, right now China has built 20,000 miles of high-speed rail. And this is high-speed rail that is real high-speed rail, not what we might call high-speed rail or label high-speed rail here for convenience. So if China builds a mile of high-speed rail, then America should build 2 miles of high-speed rail. And for every mile of high-speed internet that India might build, America should build 2 miles of high-speed internet or high-speed cable, or 3 miles of high-speed cable. And we should compete and collaborate with other countries in bringing economic development to parts of the world that haven't seen it yet. South America, we should bring economic development to Southeast Asia, Southern Asia. We should bring development and infrastructure to the Middle East and Africa, and pursue infrastructure and scientific development and space exploration there. And all this you can see at danfornebraska.com.
Yeah, now there's one last thing I want to touch on. This is kind of going back to the very beginning of the show when you mentioned you were taking care of your parents, and
sure.
And this is the idea of medical care, and this is something that affects everyone. And this is, listeners of this show will know that I've been extremely critical of the Obamacare bill, right? Mainly because of the individual mandate, which I don't believe should exist. But there is the idea of medical care should not be something that is only in existence for the privileged, and allowing insurance companies, private insurance companies, to run roughshod and do their own de facto rationing of care themselves is not a solution. But there is a solution, and you have Medicare for all. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you would provide what is essentially universal health care for American citizens?
Sure. So I'm seeing Obamacare as a bailout to private industry to private insurance companies. It offers a public subsidy for private insurance. It forces the uninsured to buy private insurance, and it fails to control the costs from what I've seen. And it also fails to defend Medicare, which is one of the most successful and popular programs that we have in America. There's also the danger of rationing care through Obamacare that has to be fought. And so you have to fight that if we see it coming up. So one of the advantages of Obamacare is that you can petition government. So in that sense, you are better off. And it does do a few good things, Obamacare. It contains it contains a way to cover pre-existing conditions, and it goes a long way towards ending rationing of care by the private insurance companies, right? By the market. So, you could be excluded by pre-existing conditions before. But what I want to do is I want to introduce and fight for a Senate version of H.R. 676. And that's H.R. 676. That's the Medicare for All bill. And that would remove, but my idea would be to remove the age requirement for Medicare, allowing people Medicare on a pay-as-you-go basis instead of paying up front and then collecting after you retire. So this way you would pay maybe $100 per person per month. It would be universally available. You could buy it if you want it, and if you don't want it, you wouldn't have to buy it. You could choose from other care providers. You'd be free to choose from your own healthcare provider. So you could, if you didn't want this Medicare for All, you wouldn't have to buy it. You could have a private insurance. But if you did take it, you would have you could choose whatever private caregiver you wanted or private healthcare provider you wanted, and you'd have regional administration, and it'd be a national program. So it would pool all of the people in the program. And like I said, if you weren't able to afford the $100 per month, you could be supported with the Wall Street sales tax. And that's another advantage of the Wall Street sales tax, is that it could provide the revenue that would be needed to support people who couldn't afford $100 per person per month.
Yeah, that's what's important about your plan here, is it provides health care to everyone who needs it or wants it, but it doesn't eliminate the private industry, right? If you want,
sure,
if you prefer the private insurance and you can afford that, then that's your option. You can do that if you want. That's your choice. But
I think that should be a choice for Americans.
Right. Mm-hmm. And if you can't afford it, then there is the Medicare for All program that's there for you if you decide that you want it. So I think it's a great plan. And now we've talked a lot about your program, but I guess we can't continue without mentioning at least your opponent.
Okay.
So tell us what makes you different from your opponent. Well, I guess we kind of answered that question through the first half of the show and then this part of the show. But just outline some of the more important differences between the two of you.
Well, let me give you a little background. I'm running third party with the Tax Wall Street Party. Obviously, the Republicans are running their candidate, and the Democrats have had their primary. And I am looking at facing a race between. It'll be like David and Goliath, right? But we've got for the Republicans, we've got a fellow named Ben Sass. He's a Republican candidate for Senate of Nebraska, and he ran in the primary as a Tea Party candidate and as an outsider and as a political rookie, which is really strange to me because his resume is a resume of an elite political insider and an elite corporate insider. So this gentleman is named Dr. Ben Sass, and he's the golden boy of the Washington and New York media circuit right now. He's gotten more attention and more Eastern establishment media coverage than any other new politician in this election cycle, and any other candidate for that matter. He's become the consensus candidate, and by that I mean he's backed by the likes of Ted Cruz, Sarah Palin. He's backed by Boehner and Mitch McConnell of the GOP leadership. And he's the most advertised of the new batch of consensus candidates and is probably the most well-funded. He's broken all records for contributions in Nebraska primary, and he's raised well over $2.5 million and has well over $1 million cash on hand. He's funded by the Club for Growth. He's funded by the Senate Conservative Fund. Both of these PACs are contributing most of his money, or a great deal of his money. And he's gotten at least 50,000 bundled money contributions from his former employers, both the McKinsey Group and the Boston Consulting Group. The Boston Consulting Group, you remember, is where Mitt Romney met his lifelong pal, Benjamin Netanyahu. And the McKinsey Group is where Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton's daughter just finished her work there. So these are elite establishment places where you can build your career and network, and they put you on an elite career track.
Yeah, that McKinsey is huge. That's a
McKinsey's
huge corporation.
Huge for sure.
They're like a consulting firm, right?
Right. There's an interesting video online from one of these CNN talk shows, and they ask what does McKinsey do, and they're hard pressed to answer what they've done successfully or what their successes are. They just say that their success is their long-standing relationships. Right. So it's quite a big company, and it's quite a very deep company. So it's not a Republican or Democrat party or a Democrat company. It's an elite company. And so Ben Sasse also has money coming from Wall Street banks like the New York City Goldman Sachs, and also our own Mutual of Omaha here in Nebraska. So I think he's quite dangerous. And he's like all the other Tea Party players in that he represents the Senate Conservatives Fund. So if you want to look at a breakdown of what SAS stands for, if you look at my platform, I've got a fighting program. I've got a fighting platform on my website. If you look at Dr. Sass's platform, well, he's got a more nebulous issues that he's running on. And I think that's because he's owned by the Senate Conservatives Fund PAC. So, for example, Dr. Sass, he wants to cut and privatize Social Security and Medicare. He said that we're guilty of a generational theft, right? So this is some sort of original sin that we have. For me, I want to preserve and protect workers with, the social safety net. For Dr. Sass, he wants to eliminate food stamps if there's any indication of what some of his partners at the Senate Conservative Fund like. For me, I want to protect workers and Americans from malnutrition, right? For Dr. Sass, he wants to abolish the minimum wage if the Senate Conservatives Fund is any indication. And for me, I want to protect wages while we bring back high-paying jobs to America and high productive industries. Dr. Sass might want to cut federal budgets, whereas I want to pay for necessary government services with a Wall Street sales tax. So these go on and on. I mean, Dr. Sass wants to roll back regulations, and I want to protect consumers and citizens and ensure their right to clean water, clean air, clean soil, clean food, right? The Senate Conservatives Fund is all about regressive taxation. I want a Wall Street sales tax. It's got to be one of the most progressive taxes we have. They support free trade. Dr. Sass supports free trade. And I want to trade with all and protect our national security and job and industries, right? So if you have free trade, you've got to protect you've got to keep in mind that you have to protect your national interests and your national security, and you have to protect industries that depend on that. So, did you want to say something?
No, continue.
Oh, okay. Thanks. The Senate Conservatives Fund and their representatives like Dr. Sass, they want no new infrastructure. For me, I'm the growth candidate. I want 21st century infrastructure. I'm the 21st century infrastructure candidate. And Dr. Sass is interested in decimating our enemies. He uses that word on his website. And for me, I want economic cooperation. I want diplomatic cooperation with countries of goodwill. And I would love to invite or encourage Russia to join in negotiations for peace around the world, for peace with Israel, for peace with other groups. I want to end the war on terror, and I think a partnership with some of these major countries that might not enjoy all of the same opinions that we enjoy, they could go a long way to help us and to bring an end to the war on terror. So I want to develop growth around the world and have that peace race that we talked about before. And I don't think you can have growth around the world and a peace race when you're looking for military provocations against independent countries and you are looking for free trade everywhere. But there's some things that I have to say that I might agree on, and that's defending the Second Amendment.
Yes, I was about to ask you about that. That's
well, okay. Well, I mean, I want to defend the Second Amendment, and I understand that some of these candidates for the Senate Conservative Fund also want to ban bailouts. Now, I'm pretty sure that their idea of banning bailouts is a little bit different than my idea of banning bailouts, because I want to ban bailouts to these zombie banks, these banks that are insolvent. But I don't mind bailing out the American people. And I don't mind bailing out the municipalities and states with 100-year credit. Yeah. So, I could continue with a comparison with Dr. Sass. I mean, this guy he claims to be a political rookie. He's got degrees from Harvard. He's got degrees from Oxford. He's got degrees from St. John's. He's got a degree from Yale. But he claims to be an outsider, right? He's got I myself have a degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, which I'm proud of, but I think that is more of an outsider's resume than the elite resume that he might have. I was a principal and teacher, an artist, and now I'm a caregiver for my family. Dr. Sass has worked for the Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey & Company, so I don't really see that as being an outsider's resume. He's worked as a congressional chief of staff. He was assistant secretary of Health and Human Services. He was chief of staff for the Department of Justice of Legal Policy. He was the liaison to the FBI, CIA, and the DOJ when they were developing, whatever they develop behind closed doors.
So just a regular guy.
Just a regular guy. He's just a regular guy who served the Department of Justice during the drafting of the torture memo, just a regular guy. So to contrast that, Nebraskans don't really support torture, and neither do Americans, and neither do our soldiers, our airmen, or our sailors. We don't support torture, and it's a curious resume spot to be in DOJ, be the number 2 at DOJ when they're developing the torture memo.
Yeah. So now, I mean, just to switch gears a
Sure.
little bit, you brought it up, and I wanted to
I
get
did.
to it. I wanted to bring it in. I wanted to bring it in toward the end here, but
Okay.
it's a very important issue, I know, to a lot of my listeners, and it's extremely important to me, and that is the Second Amendment issue. So could you kind of state clearly what your position is on that? And you said you're believe in defending the Second Amendment, but just could you explain that a little more? And
Sure.
what your position is specifically?
I think I said before I want to defend the whole Constitution. It's not a menu that you can pick and choose what things you want to try. Okay, so I support the Second Amendment, and I've spoken on this in the past. So I support people's right to have guns for sport and for hunting and for protection. And my story with that is I think it's very compelling. My grandfather, he recently passed away a few years ago, and he was 95, and I miss him for sure, but I was lucky to be able to be with him when he passed. And when he died, I was surprised to learn how great a hunter he was back in the day. And when I was a little kid, my grandpa and grandma had an old hunting dog named Dolly, and I would pet it, and I would, I would feel sorry for it because it was an old dog and had all kinds of bumps on it like those old dogs get, and it had long nails because it wasn't active anymore. But I never heard that Grandpa was a great hunter. I mean, I heard kind of, in passing that Dolly was a hunting dog, and I thought, wow, that's strange because, she didn't look it. So when I got older, I heard stories from Grandpa and Grandma of the days during the Great Depression and in the war years, and Grandpa would bring home meat to eat from hunting, and Grandma would even tease him that she even had to clean a few squirrels in her time. But those were hard times. But she was proud that they always had meat on the table for the kids, my mom and her brother and her baby sister. But it wasn't until after Grandpa died that I learned from my uncle that Grandpa was a great hunter, and that was something that really surprised me because my uncle told me that Grandpa put away his guns because he had become convinced in the 70s that guns were too dangerous to have around with small children, and we had about Grandpa and Grandma had about 10 grandchildren that were around all the time, and grandnieces and nephews, and Grandpa became convinced by this constant anti-gun rhetoric on TV that guns were just too much of a risk for little children. So he got rid of his guns. He gave up hunting. He stopped breeding and training hunting dogs. And my family lost those skills and traditions that were, our birthright, my birthright. And if you don't exercise your rights, then you'll lose them. And it's the same with our economic rights. It's the same thing. If you don't exercise your rights, you're going to lose them. So now with the gun issue, it seems that there's this irresolvable. It's irresolvable from both sides. They're funded and pushed by powerful interests, right? And I think that the Constitution says that you have the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. And while it also describes the militia, that's the people, as well regulated, right? So there's strong positions on both sides of this argument. So I think that people are nervous in America as they've seen an ever-growing police surveillance, an ever-growing police state, if you will. They claim the rights, like the government is claiming your right to privacy. They see, people have seen that their economic rights get eroded by this economic crisis that they didn't cause. They see a country at war for an entire generation, and people have been pushed or they've been pushed with a sense that they're always at risk, that they're always under constant threat, and only the levels of change of this constant threat go up from time to time. So meanwhile, the economy is still rocky after 7 years of economic crisis, of economic depression, if you will, and the people aren't sure what's waiting around the corner. So you add to this two administrations who run operations like Gun Runner and Fast and Furious, and they blame gun owners and gun sellers on violence in Mexico. And you have an attorney general who won't investigate any of these illegal gun operations, and who's on the record that he wants to, brainwash Americans to give up their guns. Those are his words. They're not my words, right? That's what he said. You can find that on YouTube. You can find that on YouTube where he talks about that. That's not me, Dan Burdorf for Senate, saying that. That's the Attorney General. So if you want to attack the Second Amendment or address the Second Amendment in this climate, that seems to me that's crazy. So I think a better way would be to reduce all violence in the best possible way, which would be to help struggling people and raise them up with effective programs like I have on my website, danfordnebraska.com. And I've spoken about this in public before. And that's, we need to address the needs for employment, for wages, for education, and other economic development issues like science and technology and infrastructure that will raise living standards and lower tensions and give some relief to the cultural decline that has accelerated during these rotten free trade, hurdy-gurdy times. And that's how I look at that issue, that you have to attack this and address this as an economic issue to relieve the pressure that these people are feeling. It's like from cycle to cycle, it seems like we're at a boiling point, and both sides are using this issue, it's really increasing tension, and it's an issue that you can't really make any headway in these times, I think. So how about addressing something that works? Address the economic needs of people so that we can all calm down and look at this again.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And Dan, we're coming to the end of the show. We've got about 2 minutes left before we have to end it. Is there anything that you would like to leave the listeners with tonight?
Well, sure. I mean, I really appreciate you very much for having me on. You have my utmost gratitude. And I want to remind listeners that innovations to the American system of politics have always come from third parties. If you look at the GOP, they introduced innovations like the end of slavery and the end of polygamy, and again, protective tariffs. And these were innovations at their time. And I think I've got exciting innovations now in this time as well. And if you look at the Democrats, they had coming from the populist movement and the populist party, they had their innovations as well. So you've got to be a voter who is looking for what you want, and you can vote strategically, and you can vote cynically, and you can send a message in this election. And I do need help in Nebraska. I need help with petitions. I need ballot access, and I need support. If you agree with any things I said, let's work together, and please support me in any way you can.
How can they contact you, Dan?
Well, that's an excellent question. You can go to danfornebraska.com, and if you want to contact me by mail, my P.O. box is P.O. Box 6584, Lincoln, Nebraska 68506, and you can reach me there.
Okay. Is there a contact tab on your website?
Sure, you can. Yeah, there's contact tabs on my website. You can go to Dan for Nebraska on Twitter, Dan for Nebraska on Facebook. If you like what I've said or you like what you see on my website, please like my webpage. Please follow me on Twitter. I need all the support I can get. I've got some, like I said, it's David versus Goliath here in Nebraska, and I'm fighting for these economic issues that are going to help the whole country. They're going to help Nebraska and the whole country. We can turn this around. We can turn around this U-turn that we've been on since I've been a kid,
We're going to have to. And again, his website is danfornebraska.com. You can also contact and volunteer through taxwallstreetparty.org. Again, taxwallstreetparty.org.
Thanks very much.
My guest has been Dan Burdorf, who's running for Senate in Nebraska. So please check out danfornebraska.com. Dan, thanks for being on the show. Ladies and gentlemen,
thank you very much for having me.
This has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmine5.
This is Ozzy's Cake.